Do you need to expand your early stage startup team but lack the capital to attract needed talent? This episode discusses the concept of sweat equity as a solution to this dilemma of attracting critical skills and expertise to your venture.
Our Favorite Tools for Entrepreneurs podcast addresses tools and concepts that are useful for the launch and growth of entrepreneurial ventures. Your two hosts will be Professor Gary Palin and serial entrepreneur Ryan Budden.
Hello, Professor Palin. How are we?
Doing really well. How are you today?
Can't be better than this. It's fantastic right now. We've got together to talk about the topic of sweat equity today. So kind of a cool topic for nascent entrepreneurs here.
That's a very important topic when you're pulling a team together.
Absolutely. So the really quick definition of sweat equity is when someone contributes towards the project without necessarily getting paid, knowing that over the course of time, they'll be rewarded for their labor, so their sweat, with equity or ownership in the business. Does that sound right?
Absolutely. It's important too, especially if you have someone with specific skills and talent that is attractive to other companies, usually larger companies. How can you possibly attract them from a good paying job to your startup? And the potential of future rewards through the equity is very often the hook.
Yeah, particularly when you can't pay them or can only very much underpay them.
Exactly. The question would be, why would they join you?
Yeah. So why sweat equity and not just equity?
If you give someone equity on day one for the potential, in essence, of the sweat, if they leave the day after, they still have that equity. So why would they stay? I've always vested and distributed the equity based over periods of time, not one period of time. So it might be in 6 months, another 6 months, et cetera.
That vesting part, I think, is key to what we're talking about here. So instead of saying, look, come and work for me, I'm going to give you 5% equity or ownership in the business. The vesting means they would come and work for you. And in 6 months, they'd get 2%. In 6 months after that, they'd get 1%. And then it might be 1%, 1%. I'm absolutely making up the time schedule and the numbers here. But the vesting is really key to this being a successful relationship and not somebody feeling like they got taken advantage of.
And the time period and the amount of equity is negotiable.
Absolutely.
You also mentioned something too from the time period, but you have to set very clear performance criteria and set milestones that have to be achieved to receive the equity. So it's not, I've just been hanging around for 6 months drinking coffee, boom, I get my 2%.
Right. Yeah. Hopefully, if you're hanging around drinking coffee, you've been fired and the equity doesn't matter anymore. But yes, absolutely.
That adds another very important component is you have to have a termination clause in the agreement so that if someone is terminated, they do not get the equity. It has to be specified in the contract.
Yeah. So two areas I see a lot of sweat equity agreements going out are engineers, so people that are actually building products. So there's a certain expectation of deliverables that give them a certain amount of equity or ownership in the business. And the other that I've seen a lot, especially recently, is in salespeople. So knowing that they could go and do whatever type of sales for a large company, incentivizing them to come to your company, and then not only giving them cash bonuses, revenue shares, however you want to do it, but giving them ownership for large sales for building the business.
Using it as a motivational tool is an excellent means of getting the team to be moving in a specific direction. But I do go back to that contract. You want to be very clear on what the expectations are and what the results will be for the equity to kick in, because you don't want it to be a verbal agreement.
So I'm not sure if you've seen like an average time period in which equity vests. For me, thinking back to the times I've been involved, it seems like 2 years is the mark.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. 2 years is typical of what I've experienced.
So you're fully vested after that 2-year mark.
And you want to be very clear on the amount of equity also.
Right.
Because it can't be some general number and it can't be 100% for sure.
Yeah. Obviously, you should talk to a lawyer about any sort of contract you're putting together, but you want to be sure that if there is fundraising that's going to be taking place during this sweat equity time, whether that's pre-diluted equity, whether it's diluted equity, at the valuation that's being established by the fundraising round. There's lots of different ways. So when you get that equity, what actually is it worth? And when is it staked in the ground? Is it from the beginning point, or is it actually during the round that's taking place?
Basically, you want to be very clear on what the results are and lay out all the potential results as the business is moving forward, because it's hard to predict it sometimes.
It's very hard to predict. And with anything to do with money, it's a lot easier to have these conversations in the beginning. You can get emotions out of the way than it is when you've just raised money. And that difference means quite a lot to two different people.
And the biggest mistake that I've seen individuals, usually nascent entrepreneurs, make is they will recruit someone, very often a friend, which is another mistake, and promise a percentage of the business if they join them. And so there's one particular that I think about is it was one of my former students started a business and he recruited someone, an engineer, to write code and gave him 1% of the business up front. That person lasted a week, but they still had 1% of the business because he hadn't been clear on the contract. Well, fast forward, after he spoke with me, he bootstrapped the entire business, owned 99% of it, and he exited by selling to Uber.
Wow. Okay.
So that 1% was quite a bit of money.
And hopefully there were still friends, so he was happy to give it, but maybe not.
I don't think so.
Little things like that can matter quite a lot.
100% of the time, make sure it's vested.
That makes a lot of sense. What other creative instances have you seen vested equity taking place or sweat equity?
I don't know if I've seen a lot of creative applications because it seems pretty consistent. You nailed the two areas that I've seen. It's through engineering talent, usually with coding talent, because very often the founding entrepreneur does not have the ability to handle some of the technical issues. And hiring someone with technical skills is very expensive. So that's probably the most common that I've seen. Also, business development, or the slang biz dev. I've seen people brought in and promise equity for the development of the business from a sales perspective.
I was going to say the other big area I see is bringing in consultants. So people that are very, very proficient at a specific thing inside of a company. If you can't pay their hourly rate, giving them a small amount of equity to still get that really big hit of expertise to drive something forwards.
I've never been successful or seen much success in professional people with equity, for example, for an attorney's fee. They typically want cash. And I understand that. I don't want to hurt their feelings, but I could wallpaper my bathroom with all those Stark certificates that I've received over the course of years. So professional people understand that the odds of it working when you're not directly hands-on involved is minimal. So they will want their payment upfront in cash.
You do bring up another area, though, that I've seen quite a lot of sweat equity given, and it's for board of advisors. When you're first starting out, if you can get sort of a heavy hitter on your board of advisors, someone that really has a lot of experience for you, asking them for their time is kind of difficult. Yes. So doing some nominal amount of equity as a, maybe not an incentive, because you're right, they probably have many pieces of 1%, but just as a, I do appreciate your time and value what you're doing.
Yeah, it's a courtesy.
There we go.
Well, any other final thoughts?
I think we've covered it pretty clearly. Just take it seriously, as I often say at the end of these podcasts.
Yes, and don't give any equity up front.
There we go.
Sounds good. Thanks, Brian.
Yep, it's great talking to you today.
Thanks for listening to our Favorite Tools for Entrepreneurs podcast. As always, you can head over to ProfSpirit.com to check out more resources and courses designed for you, the entrepreneur. Please follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, and others to get the most up-to-date information as it is released.